Last week I began my research into multi-scale design by tackling the question of how do we bridge the gap between writing code and creating content. I have a lot of experience creating visual content with code, specifically procedural animation, but I often have to sacrifice the visual quality and appeal in order to execute on my particular vision. I shouldn't have to do that. So last week I designed an experimental user interface that combines the editor features of something like Photoshop with processing, and this week I'm trying to execute on it. So far, I began developing Spanimate, in which you can create a procedural sketch with pure code, but also have precise analog control and authorship tools over specific properties of the animation. This is slightly different than my original vision, in which the editor state and the code itself were one and the same. I realized that that would be too hard to execute on, and I realized a system like this has all the same functionalities. A little bit about how this works. This is built off of p5.js, which is the JavaScript version of the processing graphics library. And I added my own editor interface that lets you request these particular values and use them in your code. I think this meshes pretty well with how processing handles drawing. It both reflects the visuals and makes it easy to edit and very flexible. As you can see, I can easily add another property I want to adjust here. Here's another example of some of the utilities I've built into Spanimate. I designed Spanimate to simplify the process of entering into positions, colors, etc. So for example, this text here, I can set its position using this vector object in the editor. I can also change its text in the editor. And this is all done flexibly through the interface I developed to interact with the editor, which only has one-way data flow, which made things a lot easier. So here's another example of how my editor makes it easier to work with particular sketches. For example, this is a Julia set rendering, and the Julia set is this fractal that's described with mathematics. And it has several properties which characterize how it's displayed. Now these properties are vectors, and with my vector interface here, I can interact with it easily. So my vision moving forward with developing this is to have even more types of objects I can define in the editor. Right now I only have two objects: number, which is a simple slider, and of course vector. Now the vector interface lets you move around the vector, and you can zoom in and out to have various levels of scale and control over the particular vector, which is particularly useful in this example because the animation can be very sensitive to the parameter. See here? It's moving drastically. But if I zoom in, I can adjust it more precisely. Now I leveraged this interface to create a procedural animation of zooming into the Julia set. Now this is building directly off of the previous code. I actually essentially created a whole set of keyframes. Now this isn't built into the library. This is something I just implemented by having a list of positions, parameters, scales that the code then interpolates through. Moving forward, I do plan on having simple animation things like tweens and various curves, but the fact that I can sort of implement that is a sign to me that this is a pretty powerful tool, and I'll be using it moving forward to create other procedural animations. So that's all I have so far for my progress with Spanimate, and I hope it was of interest.